He was underestimated from the very beginning, a man of discipline, a leader of a nation, yet seen only through the lens of bias. The black belt fighter thought he could humiliate him with one brutal strike. The impact was real, the insult even, deeper. But what he awakened was not weakness. It was a force built from years of struggle, resilience, and unshakable conviction. That day, the meaning of strength itself was rewritten. Before the strike, before the shock that rippled through the room, he was already a man who carried weight far heavier than fists. A soldier turned statesman, a leader who rose not through privilege, but through conviction and sacrifice. His daily life was marked by discipline, early mornings, endless meetings, and the burden of guiding a nation scarred by hardship. To many, he was a symbol of hope, someone who stood tall against powers far greater than himself. Yet even with all his titles and responsibilities, he was not immune to the sting of prejudice. Behind the respectful greetings and formal invitations, there lingered whispers, doubts, and subtle dismissals. Some saw him not as an equal, but as an outsider who didn't belong at the table of the powerful. On that day, in an arena filled with anticipation, those doubts would surface in their most brutal form. A test of strength was framed as sport, but beneath the surface lay something darker. A challenge rooted in arrogance, in the belief that a man like him could be broken with a single blow. He stepped forward not to prove himself, but because walking away would have meant surrendering, more than pride. It would have meant surrendering dignity. And so, as the crowd gathered and the challenger prepared, the stage was set. No one yet realized that what was about to unfold would not just test muscle or skill, it would challenge the very meaning of respect itself. The moment he stepped into the arena, whispers spread like wildfire. Some eyes carried respect, but others carried doubt, the kind of doubt born from prejudice, not reason. They saw his uniform, his stature, his authority, yet still questioned his place there. To them, he was not a leader, not a president, not a man of discipline, but simply someone they assumed could be broken. The challenger, a decorated black belt, carried himself with arrogance sharpened by privilege. For him, this was not just competition, it was spectacle. He smirked at the crowd, nodding as if victory had already been written. And when he turned to face his opponent, that smirk deepened. To him, this was more than a test of skill. It was a chance to humiliate. The tension in the room thickened as the fighters squared off. The crowd leaned forward, eyes fixed on the contrast between them. One man wrapped in years of formal training, the other carrying the calm poise of a leader forged in hardship. The bell rang, and before most could even blink, the first blow came. A brutal kick connected with his face. Gasps tore through the audience. Cameras flashed, commentators hesitated, and for a split second, time froze. The challenger raised his hands in triumph as if the fight had already ended. The message was clear. He thought he had proven what many secretly believed, that authority, dignity, even leadership could crumble under the force of prejudice disguised as skill. But then, something shifted. He did not fall. His posture straightened, his gaze locked forward, and the silence that followed was heavier than any strike. The crowd, expecting collapse, instead saw resilience. They saw a man who had faced far worse than a kick. What the black belt didn't realize was that this fight was never about fists or feet. It was about the narrative of power. Every ounce of arrogance he poured into his attack was met with a quiet strength that refused to break, and yet the challenger wasn't finished. Emboldened by the crowd's shock, he pressed forward, throwing strike after strike, each one meant to degrade, to prove dominance. But the more he attacked, the more the room began to shift. Whispers turned to unease. Doubt began to creep, not about him, but about the challenger who now seemed desperate, almost frantic. Still, the question lingered in the air. How long Could he endure? Could discipline and dignity withstand the storm of blows designed not just to hurt his body, but to insult his very existence? The audience leaned closer, waiting for an answer, because the true turning point had not yet arrived. And when it did, it would redefine the entire meaning of the battle. The strikes kept coming, each one heavier, faster, more desperate. The challenger wanted not just victory, but humiliation. He wanted to show the world that strength was his alone. And with every blow, the crowd grew louder, torn between thrill and unease. Blood traced the corner of his lip, sweat marked his brow, but his eyes never wavered. He had faced guns, coups, and the weight of leading a nation scarred by poverty and injustice. This was nothing compared to those battles. Yet still, the room held its breath, wondering if this was the moment he would finally collapse. Then it happened. Another kick was launched with full force, aimed straight at his head. Gasps tore through the hall, but this time, instead of staggering back, he caught the leg mid-air. The sudden stillness was electric. For the first time, the fighter's arrogance cracked. His smirk vanished, replaced by shock. In that frozen moment, something greater than skill was revealed. He did not strike back. He did not return violence with violence. Instead, he held firm, unshaken, unbroken, untouchable. The crowd, once divided, now saw the truth. The real power was not in fists, but in restraint, in the strength to rise above hatred. The challenger stumbled free, suddenly small, suddenly exposed. His every move after that seemed clumsy, desperate, stripped of the confidence he once carried. The fight was over, not because he had been beaten physically, but because his arrogance had been shattered. The hall erupted in murmurs, some in awe, others in shame. What they had witnessed was not the fall of a leader, but the collapse of prejudice. And as the dust settled, one question remained in the air. How do you defeat a man who refuses to be broken? When the final bell rang, there was no doubt about who had truly won. The black belt lowered his head, his arrogance stripped away in front of the very audience he had hoped to impress. But the man he had tried to humiliate stood tall, calm, and unbroken. He had not needed to land a single blow to claim victory, because dignity had spoken louder than violence ever could. In the hours that followed, whispers turned to headlines. Clips spread across screens, replayed again and again. The moment of restraint, the refusal to bend, the proof that true power is not measured by how hard you can strike, but by how much you can endure without losing yourself. For some, it was a lesson long overdue. For others, it was a mirror, forcing them to confront their own prejudice. And yet, beyond the cameras and commentary, the meaning reached further. His stand that day wasn't just for himself. It was for every voice that had ever been silenced, every person judged by the color of their skin rather than the strength of their character. It was a reminder that racism often disguises itself in arrogance, in condescension, in the false belief that some are born superior to others. But history has always shown arrogance may strike first, but it cannot endure. What endures is dignity, conviction, and the will to rise above. So the question is left with us now. When faced with injustice, when tested by those who doubt us, will we choose the path of violence, or will we rise with the kind of strength that cannot be broken? Because sometimes the greatest victory is not in defeating others, but in proving that they could never defeat you.